this time, but knowing we'll probably have a few questions, and we also have some friends joining us on a teleconference line who've been waiting, we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning. For those who are on the phone and may not know, we are here at IAC in beautiful Adelaide, Australia. And I know many of you were just in the briefing, we're making our way over, but for the benefit of everyone and some who were probably not able to attend, we're going to show a short video recapping the presentation, so we can go ahead and play that. And if you are on the line and you'd like to watch the video, it's at the Lockheed Martin YouTube channel under Mars Base Camp.
The time is now. At no other time in human history have we had the technology, the know-how, and the public excitement to get humans to Mars. We're building Orion today, right now, a spacecraft like no other designed for deep space exploration. But to get humans to Mars, we can't send Orion by itself. It needs to be part of a larger system that provides the supplies and the scientific equipment needed for a 3-year journey that will take us hundreds of millions of miles away. We call our concept Mars Base Camp.
Mars Base Camp is really straightforward. Let me break it down for you. It's an orbiting mission with 4 main sections and 2 of almost everything for backup. We have 4 large commercial solar arrays to generate electricity and power the spacecraft. For propulsion, we have 2 cryogenic propulsion stages and 2 tank farms to store the fuel, liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Of course, the 6 astronauts will need room to live on their 1,000-day mission. So Mars Base Camp has 2 habitats and a living space to eat, sleep, and exercise. Most importantly, we have Orion. It's the command deck, with all the avionics for navigation and communications. Orion makes the whole spacecraft more reliable and gives the astronauts a safe ride home.
Because we've already started, we think we can launch this system in about a decade. Orion is already flight-proven, and we are designing the Deep Space Gateway today. Soon, NASA and Lockheed Martin will launch an uncrewed Orion on the Space Launch System rocket for a mission called Exploration Mission 1, or EM, to check out all the systems over 3 weeks in an orbit around. After that, the next Orion flight, EM2, will be crewed. And on that launch, the SLS rocket will also carry the first elements of the Deep Space Gateway. The Deep Space Gateway is essentially a space dock where America and other spacefaring nations can perform revolutionary science and establish a lunar commercial economy. Through the 2020s, we will work with NASA to operate and assemble the Deep Space Gateway, and then build up Mars Base Camp and get it ready for flight. Finally, we will be ready to send humans to Mars aboard Mars Base Camp.
We've talked about how we can do it, now let's talk about why. Mars Base Camp is about more than humanity's greatest adventure. It's about science, answering fundamental questions that scientists have been asking for hundreds of years. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And are we alone? From orbit, astronaut scientists have access to the entire planet's surface for rovers and drones to make real-time decisions about where to go and what to examine. We can retrieve a sample from the surface for study. We can send the astronaut crew to the 2 nearby moons of Mars for an up-close look. And from orbit, we can confirm the site selection for the first human landing. At Lockheed Martin, we've been exploring Mars with NASA from the beginning, so we know what it takes to get here, how to operate here, and how to lead the world in doing it. Yes, Mars Base Camp is a concept, a vision, if you will, but whether it's this system that gets humans to Mars or something similar, the world is at a point in time where it has the means, the ability to write a new chapter in history, sending humans to the red planet.
So as a reminder, that video is available on the Lockheed Martin YouTube channel. We also have a selection of photos at the Lockheed Martin Flickr site. There's a Mars Base Camp album you can check out. So just, I think you might recognize a few of the people you just saw in the video up here on the stage. From left to right, we have Tim Shishan. He is the systems architect. Rob Chambers, running human spaceflight strategy, and Danielle Ritchie, systems engineer. I'll stop talking now because I know you're not here to hear me, and we'll get going with some questions in the room. Rachel right here has a microphone. We'll bring that around. We do need you to talk into the mic so that our participants on the phone can hear. And if you are on the phone and you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 to be placed in the queue and speak to the operator. All right.
Jeff Faust, Space News. What are the options for actually getting the water to Mars that's going to be used for the lander and to refuel it for the multiple sorties you're talking about doing?
Okay, Tim, you want to take that one?
Sure. And I think that we're not being exactly prescriptive on how to do that. We want to have the best ideas of the commercial marketplace about how to efficiently launch and get that water out to the system. So, you know, one company might decide to design a new type of launch vehicle and spacecraft and launch it from Earth. Another company like Planetary Resources might want to go mine an asteroid. Someone else might want to go to the moon. As long as the water shows up and then can be turned into propellant, we're happy.
I think we have one right here.
Hi, this is a question for Rob, only because you've been answering the why quite a bit. Could you tell us a little bit more generally again, why should humans be going to Mars? And a follow-up question to that is, should we be colonizing Mars, or should we just be focusing on trying to protect this planet, which is not trying to kill us every second?
Actually, I found out most things in Australia appear to be trying to kill me as well, bugs and creatures. So it's a great question. So starting with that first question of why, you know, if you ask a lot of folks, engineers or philosophers or anybody that's not even in the business, you'll probably get more reasons to explore the solar system and Moon and Mars than there are people. For Lockheed Martin, it's always been about the science and the discovery, and there's always spin-offs that occur from that. But fundamentally, understanding the world in which we live and the solar system in which we live can have drastic and powerful effects both on us here. You know, you look at Mars, and there was a picture on one of the video, or one of the slides that showed this kind of before and after for Mars, and that wasn't Earth and Mars, and that wasn't like from Hollywood. That was a NASA sketch of what we think Mars looked like back in the day, like billion years ago, and what it looks like now. And it had an atmosphere, it had running water, it was a fairly temperate zone. And we understand, you know, the core wasn't big enough, the magnetic field, and then as you were talking about, the atmosphere gets stripped away. But there are still fundamental aspects of planetary science that we don't understand that could impact us here. So that's the main reason that really turns us on. It's in our DNA. You know, where did we come from? How did these planets form? Where are we going as a species and as a planet itself? And then, are we alone? I don't think there's any more amazing question than, are we alone? Because either answer of are we alone is astounding, right? So what do we do long term? So in the near term, we like to kind of describe what we do as sort of that, from an American perspective, sort of that Lewis and Clark, right? Going out into the outback here in Australia, going out into the wilderness in order to figure out what's there and to sort of pave the way for then the subsequent expansion of an infrastructure. So where does that infrastructure lead? That's really up to us as humans, as a human race, to decide whether you want to put all your eggs in multiple baskets. When is it appropriate to put that much energy into going somewhere else? You know, how much do we focus on this planet before we go to other worlds? Something that's above my engineer pay grade, and bigger than Lockheed, right? Bigger than Lockheed Martin. It's something that's global.
So I'll take a moment, if we can, just to pause to ask our operator Johnny if we have any calls any questions in the queue online.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, that is *1 if you would like to ask a question.
So we'll move forward here in the room. I think we have one right in front.
Hello, Graham Dorrington, RMIT University, Australia. First of all, I'd like to compliment the group on a really wonderful study, well thought through. I don't know. I would like to know, really like to know, how many human hours or years have gone into this study, roughly, to get some feel for it. I have a small technical question. You answered earlier that the solar electric propulsion system, you're using xenon. Why xenon, and where do you expect to get it? Because the moon may have other inert gases like radon, which could also be used. Is there any thought about that kind of replacement? This is a minor technical question. I think the first one's the really one I want to ask.
So as with all propulsion questions, I'm going to make Mr. Chihan answer that. But while you're thinking and conjuring, the Advanced Programs Group is who at Lockheed Martin and Space Systems Company looks at these kinds of things. So we're all members of that organization. There's a couple of other folks with whom we work, but this is just one of many things that we do across Space Systems Company, everything from communications spacecraft, satellites, to Earth observing spacecraft like the GOES spacecraft that we just put up. InSight and OSIRIS-REx and Juno and all those deep space planetary missions that you've heard about. So it's a part-time job for, I'd say, about 5 of us over the last year or so. And the reason, you got to do the math. The math isn't hard. I mean, for this guy, the math isn't hard. For some of us, it might be a little harder. But it's not tricky. It's not new, right? And these systems already exist. So it's a matter of running the rocket equation and analyzing systems architectures and working through that. And then on the xenon question, that's a case where, hey, we've got a decade of experience with those thrusters at Lockheed Martin on our A2100 line of spacecraft. So we wanted to rely on those thrusters as they scale up, as those systems scale up, and to really make the most use out of the systems we have now. Now, if there's other ideas out there for sourcing solar electric propulsion propellant in space, I think we're all ears.
I just want to add on real quick. Based on what we said earlier, our architecture is really a vision. It's an open architecture that's really asking for those questions. Yeah. You know, xenon's something that's easily not accessible, but something that we're using today. But you know, what you're bringing forward on using radon is what we're asking for with our vision of Mars Base Camp, is to have people come forward with really brilliant ideas.
That's great. Ben Grubb from the Sydney Morning Herald. What next? How do we make this happen? Where does the money have to come from? And you said it's going to be a reality real soon. How soon?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll take a first crack at it and let the team also weigh in. So just to make sure we're super clear, so this is a playlist for those that sat in on the discussion. An initial vision for an architecture that could accomplish what the American government has asked NASA to put a plan for together by 2033, that could do it earlier, based on existing technologies, leveraging and extending what we have today. And so they've asked for these ideas. The thing that is real at this point, and by real I mean, you know, we're a commercial space company, right? So real means a proposal and then a contract. So what's hardware on the ground and successful flight tests. So what's real right now is 2 things, really. The next step, habitat, that module, the one that tucks in under all of those fuel tanks, and then the power and propulsion element, that solar electric propulsion technology. Those are both actively in work right now with NASA, with the industry, to start getting those put together, and proposals will start. And all of us in industry will compete for those activities. As we move forward, then NASA is going to start fleshing out in more detail what the rest of those elements on the Deep Space Gateway look like, and then on to what goes next, right? Which would be, for example, the cryopropulsion if we're getting ready to head out to Mars. That would be arguably the next thing that we would need to develop on top of what's happening today. So it really depends now on where the agencies, the space agencies of the world, and all of the other contributors and partners, as they bring their ideas forward, we're going to find out what NASA wants to do next. And certainly we're hoping and know that they're looking at all these ideas that are coming from across the industry, across commercial space companies like us, and across government institutions within NASA itself and educational organizations, on all to figure out how it happens.
From the cost question, you say the math is not hard. What are the maths on the...
Oh, fair question. So one of the constraints that we put on ourselves was one actually that we shamelessly stole from Bill Gerstenmaier, who's the head of human exploration at NASA. And if you look at his precepts or his principles for exploration, the first one is, I think it's the first one, is fiscal reality. There's not a point where we see a lot of new money showing up for any of the space agencies. We have things to work here on our planet before we necessarily go to other planets. So if you look at just the buying power of what the space agencies have today, what we have to do is to get Orion, and this is sort of my day job. You asked, how many of us work this, it's all part-time. One of my jobs, my biggest job, is getting Orion into a production phase where we're down to about half of the funding level that we are today, because we're done with development. It's a build to print. Now we're thinking F-35, Joint Strike Fighter, crank them out sort of a thing, right? And so SLS and our colleagues at Boeing and some of the other companies and the NASA folks are looking at how to do that same thing with SLS. That frees up funding to go into the development for these next activities. And so if you stack them all up as tight as you can make them, and you ensure that we're not inventing what we don't need to invent, that's how we get to, hey, you could do this in about a decade. You can beat that 2033 deadline, that goal that's been set forth, at least by the American government.
So just a last one. Could you saying basically that because of the funds that are not available, perhaps all of the space agencies around the world might want to combine to collaborate and use the resources that they have?
I think that's what NASA has asked, if people would be interested in doing that. We're always, team sport-wise, you're always better together than alone. And so NASA's put that out, from the news reports this morning. Russia has shown an interest in starting to participate in some of these early activities in the Lunar Gateway. So I, for one, hope that sort of continues. That'll allow us a much more rich experience as we voyage out to the moon and on to Mars.
So Rachel, I think we have one on the inner aisle here. Coming to you from behind.
Thank you. Tim Dornan from Australian Associated Press. I just wonder, given the length of this mission, can you tell me how many people you would plan to put on this mission? Mm-hmm. What type of people you'd plan to take, and what skills would they need? And would they essentially be different types of people than people who have travelled into space before, given the length of the mission and how long they're going to be up there?
Sure.
So I'll take a crack at that answer, and then let Rob and Tim jump in. In terms of the number of people, where our architecture looks at 6 people, and then when you start talking about the types of people, I think as we've seen with all of our crew studies, having crew interactions is one of the key components. So again, you're going to have the same traits that you see with our current astronauts on the space station. They have to be able to work together, considering they're in confined spaces for a really long period of time. And then when you start looking at skill sets, they're going to probably be very similar skill sets, but then slightly different. Again, they're going to be looking at, scientist astronauts. That's a big thing, is we want to have people that are really well versed in what they're looking for in the Martian surface, on the moons of Phobos and Deimos. And then being able to also be a mechanical engineer or being a medic, and having multiple people trained in different skill sets. So very similar to what you see today, but just have a little bit more breadth and depth in their skills. So of course, we're looking for the best and the brightest. And then I think you were asking more about the diversity of the crew. And I think a big thing that we talk about and what we do with Space Station is looking at, and we reference this because it's a great model for how people work together, especially internationally. And the crew is going to be more international. It'll be, people that are contributing to, this vision of a deep space transport of Mars base camp. We're looking at, hey, did you help out with a habitat, an arm, where are you? And some of it's going to be funding-wise, and then what skill sets are you bringing? What kind of crew can we form out of that? And it'll definitely be an international partnership.
Presumably you're going to take a botanist and lots of potatoes?
Yes, that's probably the first slot to be filled. We got a lot of volunteers, actually.
So we'll take a pause here in the room for just a moment to see if anybody's queued on the line.
It appears we have no questions over the phone lines at this time.
Great. All right. Looks like we have plenty in the room. So there's a mic right behind you, sir.
Thank you. Jeff Locke from the Royal Aeronautical Society in Australia. I'm very confused about going to Mars. When I look back on that, the 60s, the great 60s as I call it, where President Kennedy said we wanted to go to the moon, and there was a tremendous escalation in people wanting to do STEM subjects, etc., university courses, etc. And I can remember where I was when they landed on the moon. It's something that will never go away. But looking forward 3 years to 1972, it all stopped, and it's basically been replaced with the International Space Station. So, and yet we've never gone back to the moon. So why, in the name of goodness, do we want to go for, depending on which session you go to, 2 years or 3 years, which worries me again because we're not quite sure. Why do we want to go to Mars when we haven't actually been back to the moon? So I'm confused, so sure. Maybe you can help me.
So by the way, I'm jealous. I missed the moon landing by like 6 months. I was born in 1970. I've been relatively bitter about it ever since, so that's why I'm doing what I do. The answer isn't the moon or Mars, or whether or not to go to Mars. It's the moon and Mars. And so one of the things we try to make sure folks understand, you know, you need the horizon goal. I quote my grandma a lot, and she said, look, you got to know where you're going to wind up going in the long run before you take your first 2 steps. But then after that, you better be ready to do the jitterbug because you don't know what's going to happen next, right? But you got to have that long-term goal. And so the pull, the horizon pull of Mars as our destination, what we found as we talked through about the orbit and the orbital mission and so forth, we realized how much does it drive, incredibly, your operations at the moon and designs of things like the lander or the habitats and so forth, so that you can have that extensibility to go to the next one. So, you know, when you look at what we did on Apollo, I don't look at it that we retracted to low Earth orbit. What we did is we pushed out, we started to get some understandings, and then we did our homework. And we've been doing our homework in low Earth orbit to understand long duration missions, year at a time, and understanding what it's like, how you maintain the physical anatomy and how you handle weightlessness and the degradation of bones and all those types of things, and then how to operate effectively and how to get long duration life support to work and all of those. But we're at the point now where we're ready to go back out. We've done our homework, and now it's time to go, not take the final exam. My analogy fails me at this point, but to go back out. And the first stop is the moon, right? And the debate is just simply, do we go into orbit about the moon, set up our base camp? That's sustainable. That's the way that we're going to send supplies back and forth, and it allows the commercial development of an economy and so forth. Once you get that lunar base camp in work, that deep space gateway, then it's a question of, do you land and do you use some stuff on the moon and set up a base and so forth? And you've heard the moon village, right? The lunar village, Jan Werner's. Or from that deep space gateway, do you go straight on out and get started on an orbital mission around Mars? And that's open for discussion. In either case, what we're building is extensible to do either one.
Any other questions here in the room?
Hello, my name is Mikko Suominen. I'm a freelancer from Finland. I have 2 questions. One of them is about your phases of the phase of this base camp concept. Are you first going to have one mission? Will you leave some infrastructure on Mars orbit? And what are your more detailed plans on that? And the second is about the lander. How many, you mentioned that you can do several trips on to the surface and back, and how much fuel have you thought to have? How many back and forth trips could you have, and have you considered having some automated fuel factories on the Mars surface?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, so I'll try and answer your first question, let Tim answer the second. In terms of the Mars Base Camp elements, we talked about earlier pre-positioning a bunch of elements using solar electric propulsion from using xenon or radon, whatever your propellant source is. And these elements are the ones that would stay in orbit around Mars. So again, like a laboratory, a center node, a cupola, a robotic arm. And then the elements that kind of transport back and forth are going to be more of your safety critical elements. So again, using multiple cryogenic propulsion stages, multiple Orions, and then your tank farms. And of course, having a little bit more living space than a tiny box would be good for crew health. So what we're looking at, and then from the cislunar space is where you would shuttle your crew to and from. And so what we're really looking at is assembling Mars Base Camp in that cislunar space and then taking it to Mars, meeting up with our pre-positioned elements, performing our Martian science exploration objectives, and then leaving those pre-positioned elements and coming back to cislunar space.
And then on the question about refueling the lander, the number of sorties that you can perform during the 1 year stay in Mars orbit is really just limited by how much propellant you get out there. And so a single load of the vehicle is 80 metric tons of propellant, which is a good sizable number. And so that commercial marketplace of bringing water out there and converting it into propellant, and probably, given the time frame and the size of the solar arrays and how long that takes, maybe you can do 2 or 3 sorties a year out there. And certainly we can, as we continue those missions and we're spending more and more time on the surface, we can set up automated facility on the surface of Mars to mine the buried water ice and create propellant. But before we get to that stage, we think operating out of orbit is actually easier to do, easier to rely on that supply chain across Earth, Moon, asteroids, whatever.
Any other questions here in the room?
Mark Williamson, Engineering and Technology magazine. Can you say a little more about the engineering references for the lander concept? I can see the science fiction references there quite plainly, but I'd be interested in the engineering side, if you would.
From a reference point of view, yeah, so we've been publishing a couple papers over the years. We have a paper here at IAC, and so I would look to that paper for those technical references.
I think what he was talking about, so I said, it looks a bit like Jules Verne, but it's actually more like an aircraft that we've flown in the past. And so if you were to strip the skin off, by the way, so I think you did a pretty good job you're welcome, during the presentation of Orion as the command deck and the flight software and so forth. And what you'd see underneath it would just be cryo-hydrogen and cryo-oxygen tanks and the RL-10 engines. And it's essentially a derivative of what the Mars Base Camp cryo-propulsion stage looks like. The references I was making as I was talking on was just actually to the SR-71, one of many supersonic long-duration aircraft that we've built here on Earth. And the reason that I just referred to that is when you look at this, it's a low L/D or mid L/D, 0.6. The heating that we get on it, although intense and more than you would see on a supersonic aircraft, is really confined to the forward leading edges, as you might guess. But the side panels, the stuff on the top in the lee is frankly no hotter than you would get from an instantaneous heating standpoint, heat load perspective, than you would, again, SR-71, just because we're familiar with it being built by Lockheed. But you definitely have to have carbon reinforced, leading edges and the underbelly. But it doesn't need to be a heat shield. It doesn't need to be ablative, and it's 100% reusable. And then I talked a little bit about, well, what are the aerodynamic forces relative to, again, a supersonic aircraft? And they're within like a factor of around 2 of what you would see from a supersonic aircraft going Mach 3, let's say. And because that atmosphere is so thin. And so we think 5 kilometers per second, we're like, holy moly. But in reality, it's a thin atmosphere. And so we're able to take that out relatively slowly. And of course, the integrated heat load that you get up over time is a lot less, simply because those supersonic aircraft ran for miles on end, right, or hours on end, and miles, but many, many miles, hours on end. Whereas, for us, it's a 20-minute, 30-minute entry profile.
And then as far as the Mars Base Camp vehicle, right, You see the reference to Orion, reference to launch vehicle upper stages, to the habitats that we've flown on the International Space Station, to the large solar arrays, the concepts that are out there. And then the idea is to take, the best ideas across the international community and the commercial community and put, because that's the way a vehicle that goes to Mars will be put together, contributions from everyone.
Thank you.
I think we had one up front here. Rachel, I'll bring you the mic.
Oh, this probably follows what you've just said. I'm from the Conversation online newspaper. I'm interested in a comment on your feeling about the relative importance of support from all the different sectors that are involved. So there's obviously your own government support working in the USA, but then there's international governments as well, as you hope to pull everyone in. How important is the support of the broader world community? How important is commercial support? How important are all these little factors? Can you weigh the importance of each of those adding together to make this happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, both of them look at me. So first, we wanted to put together, as one of our ground rules, something that was achievable, sort of regardless of those, but the implementation is so much easier when it's a team sport, right? And I think, our NASA customer has said this, and we've said it. I'm going to say collectively, we, the human race, it's bigger than a single country and a single company, because you got to combine both that skill and the will of everybody. Commercial is interesting because it's a huge enabler that follows right behind the enablement by the government, right? And so it's this interesting relationship between the two. But as soon as we get to the point where something can be safely and logically handed off to a commercial entity like us, the commercial sector, then we're able to apply some lessons learned from over the years. And so it's a delicate, not dance so much as a handoff between all the government agencies and their industry partners across the bow. So it's tough for me to say which one is the most important, quite honestly, because in the end it has to be an and proposition. You'd hate to say, well, we can only, it's really an and proposition. I probably can't say it any better than that.
We need everything.
Ben Grubb again from the Sydney Morning Herald. A curious thing happened 50 minutes into your press conference. Elon Musk pulled out of doing his press conference. Your reaction to that? He's still doing his presentation. He tweeted about 7 minutes ago. But the wording is from the organisers of this conference that it will most, quote, probably not take place, end quote, we are sorry. Why do you think this has happened? Do you think that he ran scared?
I think that's probably just as much news to us as it is to you.
But this is a legitimate question for the panel here.
I think my question or my answer to that is really kind of what I said yesterday with one of the Aussie radios. I appreciate everybody's interest in space, and whether it's a presentation, whether it's a press conference, what it's really driving at is stimulating that interest from everybody around the world, and especially near and dear to my heart is like the STEM aspect, or STEAM. We want the brilliant minds of children to be excited to explore for tomorrow. I didn't have any notion of being alive while Apollo landed on the moon. So I'm really excited to see what brilliant minds bring forward for landing on the moon and Mars tomorrow. So back to your question, I'm excited for anybody doing anything generating interest in science and space.
Very diplomatic answer.
It's a true answer. I think it's great all the way across.
Any other questions here in the room? Looks like we'll close. I would like to thank everyone for participating today. If you'd like to follow up with someone individually, please see me and I can help with that. If you are on the phone and you've been in contact with Gary Napier, he can help you from that end. And also, before we depart, and sort of playing off Danielle's last set of remarks, at 10 a.m. in the Lockheed Martin stand, we will have a Generation Beyond event where we will be talking about the importance of STEM and what we'll be doing to help inspire the next generation of space explorers. So please do come and see us there. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of this last day at IAC.
Thank you. Thank you.